Hi, I'm Len Rydell, the Executive Director of the Blue and Gray Education Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our lecture series on the Overland Campaign, which took place, our lecture series took place in May of 1995. It was our third program as an organization, and it was marked by some outstanding scholars and scholarship of the time. I got everybody who was anybody within the campaign to give a presentation. Unfortunately, as you will learn from some of these, we lost people like Gordon Ray and Richard McMurray because the quality of the tapes just wasn't there to put them online here. And you will have also heard my introduction to Bill Matter's talk, in which I set up the wilderness just to transition into his talks on Spotsylvania. Having finished with the fighting around Spotsylvania, as Grant continued to sidle to the east, he was doing it for one purpose and one purpose alone. That was to try to draw Robert E. Lee into the open. He knew the numbers game, especially given the bloodbaths that had taken place at the Wilderness and in the battles around Spotsylvania. I mean, this is a for Union numbers. By the time Grant gets to Petersburg, he'll have emptied all the garrisons around the D.C. Fortifications, and he will have lost upwards of 70,000 casualties. It's such a remarkable battle. The world's not ever seen anything like this before, and the political ramifications of it are huge because the parties are getting ready to go into their national convention shortly, and if the amount of casualties is known to the public, then Lincoln's goose is cooked. There's no question he'll be defeated because of all the bloodshed and the amputations and the death and so forth. And so there's actually is a conspiracy to cover up the details of the Overland Campaign. There's a wonderful book written by the late David Long called Jewel of Liberty. It was his doctoral dissertation, and he primarily addresses this issue of masking the casualties and so forth to avoid doing great damage to the political leadership of the Union by ensuring that the morale of the people, which is one of the triads of war, the other being the army itself, the morale of the army, the morale of the people, and the morale of the political leadership. That's necessary to do this and so to be successful at war. And so Grant, realizing that Lee is losing significantly, he knows Longstreet's been injured and is out of action, and he's seen the terrible casualties of 20-hour fighting on May the 12th at the Bloody Angle and subsequent reactions that Lee has shortened his lines and so forth. And so Grant looks to try to tempt Lee into the open field where he believes that his numbers, that calculus again, will result in the destruction of Lee's army. To do that, at the tail end of the Spotsylvania campaign, he sends Winfield Scott Hancock on really an aimless sortie toward the east without any protection or anything, hoping that indeed that Lee will hear about it, find, just as Lee tried to do at the start of the 7 days with Fitzjohn Porter and destroying a corps, will take the bait, figuring if he can destroy a corps, that maybe that will break up this relentless assault that Grant has launched on him. And unfortunately for Grant, Lee is a wise old fox, and he knows better than to come out from behind his earthworks. And so instead of chasing Hancock, Lee looks for the opportunity, and then he falls back to an old reliable location that he always thought he might have to defend, which was the North Anna River. And while he had had success in holding the Rappahannock River, he always realized that if he was weakened by a detachment of troops to the west, or if one of these turning movements, which Hooker was correct in thinking that he would, by turning Lee out of the high ground around Fredericksburg, that Lee would have to either come fighting, which bad news for Hooker, Lee did, or he'd have to flee ingloriously. And Lee knew that action would require him to go back to the North Anna. So, excuse me, work had already started around the North Anna in what, even today, when you go out and you look at the Oxford Park at North Anna in Hanover County, the earthworks are just remarkable, and they're 160 years old now. So Lee, looking at this, falls back, and he gets himself back to the North Anna, which is the core of this next story. Mike Miller, our speaker, is a remarkable man. He is as low profile a person as you would ever meet in your life. And to be honest with you, I had second thoughts. I looked at him, I talked to him, and I said, geez, is this guy going to get the word out? But here's a man who was responsible for taking people and 4-star Marine Corps generals, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, on staff rides and setting things up. Mike knows and knew his business. And his master's thesis, which he had gotten his master's studying under Bud Robertson at Virginia Tech, excuse me, I've got to turn off a meter. There we go. I'm sorry. He's got his master's degree under Bud Robertson at Virginia Tech, and his master's thesis was the North Anna Campaign. And he had just published that book in the Battles and Leaders series that Harold Howard was doing out of Howard Press in Lynchburg, Virginia. And it was the only book out there really on the North Anna Campaign. And so I picked it up and I read it, and it was a master's thesis type of book. But when I reached out to Mike, he was very, very personable. He lived up in Fairfax, still lives up in Fairfax, Virginia, and was working at Quantico. And I was in Fredericksburg at the time, so it was only 25 miles away. So I went up, met with him, talked with him, and he was agreeable to doing this presentation. And so I invited him to come down and talk about what he knew best. Subsequent to this, all those interpretive signs you see out there, that was Mike's vision, our effort, Blue and Gray's effort, and Blue and Gray's money. So we've had a long partnership with Mike Miller. And while I haven't seen much of him in the past 10 years or so, I know he's enjoying his retirement, and I hope you will enjoy his relatively short but effective presentation on the fighting for the North Anna River.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to have people interested in North Anna. It's one of those little battles that most people don't know much about, and frankly don't care much about until they come and delve into it a little bit. And I would count myself among those that didn't care much about it until about 1979, when I was a fresh young graduate student at Virginia Tech under Dr. Robertson. And I was flailing about for a topic, and of course I wanted to do Gettysburg, the crater, something like that, Second Manassas. And he says, oh, no, we need to have something fresh and new for you. So he called Bob Crick and said, what needs to be done? And Bob called back and said, Cedar Mountain. I thought, Cedar Mountain, that's great. That's Stonewall Jackson. I do all kinds of good things with that. And the next week, I had about a week with that. Next week, Bob calls back and says, no, I'm going to do Cedar Mountain. And we all know how that turned out. And he said, you do North Anna. And I said, North Anna? I've never heard of that. And I decided I'd take it on for a couple of weeks and find a nice, polite way to dodge off onto something else I really wanted to do. And as you can see, I never accomplished that task, because the more that I studied the North Anna, the more I became impressed with it, with its significance in Civil War history. And of course, I'm a biased observer, and with Bill here, it's kind of hard to say, but I always put the North Anna down as one of the most critical battles of the Civil War. And hopefully by the end of the day, you'll all agree with me and rush about as new disciples of the North Anna battlefield. But I kind of doubt that. All I want you to do today is to take away a new appreciation for a battle that's not well studied, and that would help you with your Civil War study and putting together the long chain of the Overland Campaign as being the most decisive campaign of the war, and how the North Anna fits into that. The North Anna is not a battle of huge casualties. It's probably about 15 minutes of Gettysburg casualties tucked into those few days. There's only about 3,000 men lost on either side, which would include the sick. There's no bloody angles, as Bill dealt with. There's no Pickett's charges. There are some interesting things there, including a drunken general, but not a lot of those great things that authors like to write about. But it is significant. It is significant. And I hope by the end of the day you'll agree with me there. Why has it been lost to history? I think for those very reasons. It's not that well studied because it doesn't have the large charges and that type of thing. Now, how does it fit into the campaign? I understand you left off with Harris's farm at your last stop. So what I want to do is draw you a little Miller map here of the area you'll be studying today. And that's Spotsylvania. And way down here is a little strategic point called King's Dominion. King's Dominion.
We're going there.
We're going to go there. We're close to. King's Dominion is what I like to term the site. Everybody passes up and down 95 knows where King's Dominion is. That's the closest place that you can recognize to modern-day Doswell, then Hanover Junction. And Hanover Junction is a strategic point because two railroad lines intersect there. The RF&P, Richmond, Fredericksburg, Potomac, and the Virginia Central. And so it is here that Grant is going to face his next important point, something that he can try and impale Lee on. What has been his trouble through the wilderness in Spotsylvania? Lee's always gotten down behind breastworks in difficult terrain and negated Grant's superior numbers. So now Grant wants to try and fight him outside of those breastworks and perhaps try to pin him against a place like this, where Lee must fight. He has to fight for this thing. It's the main artery to the valley, to Stanton, and all that Confederate breadbasket there. So how's he going to do it? Well, he's going to use the waterways of the Mattaponi River. And the Mattaponi River looks like a hand reaching out, but really what it is, it's the Mattaponi rivers that all flow together to make the Mattaponi. It's a nice way to do things in Virginia, isn't it? All the rivers flow together with their names to form this. And what Grant wants to happen is he gives his one corps, the second corps, orders to march far south as Richmond as you can in one day, starting on the evening of May 20th and early morning of May 21st. Proceed this way, and eventually he's going to end up at Milford Station, where this railroad line really goes. And he's going to threaten this point. Lee must react to that. Can't sit in his trenches here, which Keith can ably tell you about. the Newmarket Cadets succeed in, along with others, succeed in driving back Franz Sigel. And what that allows to happen is Breckinridge brings down reinforcements to Lee. Perhaps 3,000 more men. And what's happening down in front of Petersburg, Richmond? Ben Butler. He's been bottled up. So all of these campaigns that Grant started off with in the wilderness have now come back to haunt him. Basically due to bad commanders, because that allows Pickett's division, the Hoke's Brigade, to come up and reinforce it. They're up here on the rail lines. And what that means is that Lee now can bring his force back to close to 50,000 men. Close to 50,000 men. Against Grant's probably 78,000. It's pretty good odds for somebody like Robert E. Lee. So you can see the events of the wilderness, Spotsylvania, have now flipped the tide on Grant. And his hammering tactics have lowered his army down to a place where he pulled back, even if he suffered a serious blow here. But remember, what is 1864 in the North? It's an election year. And how long will the North stand by while these casualties accumulate without a whole lot of progress? Now, what about Lee's side of things? Lee also realizes that his defensive position here along the North Anna, which is just north of Doswell, King's Dominion, is a place where he really must strike Grant a blow. Because how far is King's Dominion, Doswell from Richmond? It's only about 25 miles or so. And those, how far can a Civil War army march in a day? 15, 20 miles. Some plus, some minus there, depending on their obstacles. So if Grant is allowed to pass this area one more time, how close will he then be to Richmond? He'll be within a day's march. Thereby Lee losing his greatest asset, which is his ability to maneuver. If he allows Grant to pass him one more time, then Grant will have taken away his Chancellorsville flanking marches, 2nd Manassas flanking marches, things like that, where an inferior number can negate a superior number. And once Lee loses that, he always has to keep his army between Grant and Richmond. It then becomes basically a siege. And as Lee tells Heath at Spotsylvania, this army can't stand a siege. It then becomes a matter of time. So you can see the end of the war if Grant is allowed to pass this again. And basically, those are Lee's words, not mine. So now you understand the importance of this battle, this campaign, for both sides. Lee must fight a battle here. Must not allow him to pass us again. He must fight him here. He has the resources from the valley and Petersburg to do it. Grant really can't stop. He's got to continue his movement down. And he wants to fight Lee outside of those entrenchments. And he throws out the whole Second Corps as bait to try and do that. And that's the genesis of the North Anna battle. Any questions before we continue?
Now, you did say that Hanover Junction, the closest that we would recognize would be Doswell.
Yeah, Doswell. You can we'll go by there today. You'll drive over the tracks. You'll see where those two lines intersect, just as they did in 1864. They do today. It's still the major north-south terminus today. 95, Route 1, the railroad tracks, as it was in 1864 with the telegraph road, the railroads then. So that's modern-day Doswell. Okay, the importance of it, you start to see it's building now. And really, this is the culminating battle for Lee. What Wilderness and Spotsylvania lead up to here is a decision along the North Anna. Okay, other questions? Now I'll dazzle you with the slides. Hope nobody falls asleep when this happens.
If I see those,
It's always a good thing to wake up to casualties. That gets everybody's attention.
everybody see those okay?
Everybody can see from the back? Okay. These are Confederate casualties, supposedly from Harris's Farm, May 19th, your last stopping point. And this is what the Confederate soldiers would have been dressed with as on their way to the North Anna. You can see just about everybody here is well equipped, dispelling that myth of what the soldiers were dressed like at that time of the war. Everybody has shoes, everybody is dressed in a uniform of some type. And there's our man, Ulysses S. Grant. Probably heard his name 50,000 times this weekend. This is a Cold Harbor. This is what he would have looked like during the North Anna battle. This is his bait. Winfield Scott Hancock. Grant seemed to always think him as the best Corps commander and the Second Corps as the best. And as he sent them on their march, he had great confidence in Hancock. Again, much better map than I drew. There's Spotsylvania Courthouse there. Here's the RF&P coming around like this. And this is the Telegraph Road. And this map is in your handout, a version of it. You can follow along there as the race continues. That's the label. And you can see the little streams flowing along here. The Mattapony River line. You'll also notice Kemper's Brigade and Lewis's. These are some of those troops coming up from Richmond, and even as Grant is sending Hancock right on his flank. This is Guinea Station. You've probably been here at some time or another. This is the house where Jackson died. This was Hancock's target at first light on May 21st as his corps comes marching through. This was the forward depot for Lee's army. He had moved it back to Milford Station after Spotsylvania. So this would have been the scene of 20,000 or so Union troops marching through on the morning of May 21st. This is a Corps view of the Mattapony River. It's not very deep. Again, this is a Guinea Station. It's not very deep, but it's swampy on either side. And it's very difficult to move wagons, artillery, resupply, that type of thing. This is the Fredericksburg National Cemetery. This fellow here is First Sergeant S. Sorte. He was the first man killed in the action at North Anna. He's the 5th New York Cavalry. He was leading the Union cavalry into Guinea Station, and they get ambushed right there at the Mattapony River. He falls. This is Bowling Green. You get a better view of that today. Hancock's next stop on his flank march, and some parts of it are just as they were in 1864. This is the courthouse, and this is the Carolina Historical Society, which was the former county jail. And Union troops liberated both prisoners, one black and one white, out of this place. And next stop is Milford Station. This is where Hancock runs into his first real opposition. It's the dozing men of Kemper's Brigade. The original station stood between these tracks and the railroad building back behind there. And these poor fellows were amazed by the fact that all these Union troops were heading their way. Not a whole lot of prior warning. Hancock takes the place, puts a bridgehead across the Mattapony, and sits there and waits for Lee to react. Lee has already reacted. He's given orders from to Ewell on the 20th, more by luck than happenstance. He sends Ewell around to the right and halts him at Mud Tavern. Now Lee's problem is he sees this movement almost as it begins, but he finds that these trenches at Spotsylvania are still well held. And in some cases, Grant has tripled the picket line there to prevent Lee from finding out. So until noon, Ewell is held here. Finally, Lee sends him south. And the rest of the Confederate Army does not leave until about 5 p.m. of May 21st. So in effect, Grant has stolen the march, going south towards Boswell. And this is Massaponax Church, Grant's headquarters, May 21st, 1864. The church still stands. This is the famous conference. Here's Grant looking over the shoulder of Meade. You see they've taken the church benches out and put them there. This is the 5th Corps weapon wall. But what are they talking about here? What's the discussion? Well, we've all seen these pictures, but it's more interesting to know what they're speaking of, and that is the fact that intelligence has come back from Hancock. We both know that Kemper was part of Beauregard's force at Drewry's Bluff, and now they're facing a horse of a different color because this is their first indication that reinforcements have arrived. And they're having this conference to see what to do about that. Grant, would be very interesting to hear what Grant had to say in the morning of the 21st, because the orders that come out of this conference change his whole plan around. Because he wants the rest of the Army, instead of going down the Telegraph Road and engage Lee, to go out and try and support the 2nd Corps, who takes the bait off the table almost immediately after the Hancock marches. So that's what they're talking about there, trying to support Hancock, because now Grant is worried that Lee is going to pounce on that unsupported corps. And here they are again. And it probably was a couple tight minutes for Grant there. He rides on to Guinea Station. This is the Motley House. Grant takes his place up here on the porch. He never stayed inside the houses. We always picked beautiful houses for his headquarters sites. And this thing overlooks the Mattapony River Valley, very beautiful house site. And he started to think about what his next move was going to be. He laid his cigar down on a bench there on the front porch. The bench started to smolder, and George Motley, the owner, came running out and said, "What are you trying to do, General? Burn my house down." And Grant took umbrage at that, went over to the next nice house, which happened to be the place where Jackson had died at Guinea Station, and became one of the first tourists to the Jackson property. So you see, this is the development of Grant. He's shifting the 9th Corps back. Everybody's going to march around to Guinea Station and try and support Hancock. But all for naught, because as Lee pulls out, he does not take the bait. He's going to fight his next battle along the North Anna, one of his favorite defensive lines. Prior to the Battle of Fredericksburg, he wanted to fight there. Jefferson Davis says, "No, you're not going to give up that much in Virginia. Fight behind the Rappahannock." During the winter of 62-63, he sends down 2 of his aides, Long and another, to reconnoiter the line, because I'm assuming he thinks that he's going to fight there eventually. So he knows well the North Anna. On the 22nd, Grant puts his headquarters here at the Tyler House. Another beautiful structure here. This is the place where Burnside comes up on the porch and bows to the ladies and asks them if they'd ever seen so many Union soldiers before. And she says, "Oh yes, many times in Richmond," referring to Union prisoners. And everybody laughs at Burnside's expense. And Burnside gets a little angry and goes over here to Bethel Church. And this is where he puts his headquarters. This is on not May 23rd, this is May 22nd. The church still stands, and we'll see that today. There it is. And the final movements are, you see Grant bringing down his columns to put them on a line with Hancock, and the rest of the Confederate Army moves down across the North Anna. So that on the 22nd, it's really the first time that these armies are not struggling with each other since the beginning of the campaign. And the soldiers appreciate that. You read their diaries and letters, and they have a chance to jump in the river for a bath, something they very much need at that point. Now this is modern-day Doswell. This is that strategic point I was telling you about. The track going this way is Virginia Central. That takes you to the valley. The track going this way takes you here to Fredericksburg. That's the RF&P. And you can actually stand there one of the few times you can stand on a battlefield area and look at a strategic point. And you'll see that today. And these tracks still are active, just as they were in 1864. Here's our friend Hancock, his 3 division commanders here. And this was taken during the Cold Harbor battles, and you can see what they would have looked like at the time in North Anna, just the week before. On the 23rd, Hancock is ordered to head for the North Anna, and Grant feels that if Lee hadn't taken his bait, then Lee must really be damaged from these previous battles, and we're going to go after him. So in effect, he orders a frontal assault to the North Anna River. And the first thing they run onto is the Chesterfield Bridge, held by Kershaw's old brigade of South Carolinians, now commanded by Colonel Hennigan. And the first thing that Hancock runs into is Long Creek. And he reports back to Grant. He says, we've crossed the North Anna, and we are now proceeding south towards Richmond. And all of a sudden they find they really haven't done anything at all but cross the little creek there. And on the evening of the 23rd, they make an assault, 2 reinforced brigades, and take the bridge. This is the area from the air, and this is the RF&P here. This is the Route 95, and this is Route 1. You can see 3 major arteries right there today. And the ground is heavily wooded, as you can see. It was much more farmland at the time of the battle. This is the south bank of the river. Again, this is Route 1. This is the Fox House Grove in here. North Anna runs just in here. This is the Ox Ford area. Now this is the Fox House, and as you all well know, Lee became stricken on the 23rd of May with an intestinal ailment, diarrhea, and he's forced to ride on his lines in a carriage. And he pulls up here, Kershaw's headquarters, and he's invited to the front porch by the owner, Parson Fox, for a glass of buttermilk, which probably did him worse than he'd left it alone. And he's sitting up here and he's saying the Union Army is not really going to cross, this is just a feint. And a Union shell comes underneath his arm and sticks into the doorpost, which had it exploded, North Anna will be full of monuments. And you can still see the cutout there from the shell. But this convinced Lee that Grant really was serious about this and he was coming across. This is another place. The Fox House had many close calls. That was the first of them. E.P. Alexander, if you read his memoirs, they all clustered around behind the house as the shells came pouring in from right to left. And they thought, well, this house in between, nothing would get them, they'd be safe. But one of those Union shells clipped off part of the chimney, bricks came falling down. Alexander had to jump in between, and 2 couriers were wounded very seriously. And Alexander almost lost his life there. On the 24th, after Union forces cross and occupy the house, Burnside and Hancock are almost killed in the front yard out here by a Confederate shell which hits seconds after they walked away from the house. There's Alexander there. This is Hennigan's readout. This is the view you would have had if you were charging Confederate heading for the fort. Hennigan's men kept waiting for the orders to either withdraw, burn the bridge, or reinforcements. None of that came, so when the Union juggernaut came across the fields, they took the better part of valor and took off running to get across. So really the only fellows that stayed were those that wished to be captured or the very tough. And the Union forces jumped into the moat surrounding the redoubt. They had no way to scale the wall here. It's very slippery, So one fellow put himself up there, made a human ladder. People climbed over his shoulders to get up on top of the structure. This is the interior of the redoubt. It's actually made from the house that stood there. You can still see the bricks that they used to construct the thing. This is the view from inside looking out towards Wall Street. And this is the North Anna, 1993 or so. At the time of the battle, it was about waist deep, knee deep. This is the Telegraph Chesterfield Bridge, and this is the redoubt on top here. So if you've been standing in this position on the evening of May 23rd, you can see quite a few Confederates running back down trying to get across this bridge, chased by screaming Union forces. And one poor Confederate decided he wasn't going to cross the river. He said he didn't know how to swim, he didn't know how deep it was. He took off running across the bridge, and he was running so fast his cap fell off. And he started to think, well, if I get back there, my friends will never, they'll never leave me alone because I went off and left my hat. So under fire, he runs back, picks up his cap, and makes it back across. Now the Union forces come running down here, and the color bearer of the 20th Indiana says, "Come on, boys, let's go across." And he starts running, and he gets about 3/4 of the way over, and looks back, there's nobody behind him. Confederates pick him off, and he's yelling for help. And indeed, someone does run over, but instead of helping him, they pick the flag up and get it back across the bridge. And he does become rescued after dark. This bridge was under fire for most of the battle. And as Union forces crossed this thing, they had to do so at a walk, because they were afraid that a trot or a run would knock the thing down. There's a view of it with the horse coming across. This is the modern day view. Of course, this concrete above it wasn't there, but that's the track of the old Telegraph Road. And this is an interesting view of the North Anna river bottom. And you can see it's shale, very difficult for infantry to cross, much less artillery and wagons. And there's a lot of stories about how the Union soldiers coming across would slip and fall, and first you'd see a guy's head, then you'd see his feet popping up, and mules and other animals doing the same thing. But as Hancock is having his fight down there at Chesterfield Bridge, the second prong of the assault is coming across here, Jericho Mill. They cross unopposed, put in a pontoon bridge, and everybody thinks life is fine. Here's a view of the pontoon bridge. Jericho Mill. The buildings are all gone, destroyed by a forest fire in the 20s. But still a very scenic area, those of you that have ever seen it. And Choctaw Freeman called it one of the most scenic areas in Virginia. This is a 20s view. The National Park Service was going to acquire the battlefield and the link between Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor in the 20s, and just as now they ran out of money, and guess who got chopped? North Anna. This is a very interesting view because it shows the South Bank, and this is where the major action for North Anna took place. This is the Jericho Mill battle on the evening of May 23rd. The Union troops came across, got to the high ground, and fanned out and deployed in 2/3 of a bridgehead. And that's when Confederates found out they were there and sent up only one division of A.P. Hill's corps, Cadmus Wilcox's division, the old light division of A.P. Hill. And they arrived, and their intelligence tells them that there were only 2 Union cavalry regiments through those woods. So they deploy and move forward, and they find out they're fighting the whole 5th Corps. But they do something very interesting. They deploy an artillery battalion, the Ingrams, and they start sending shells in. They know there's pontoon bridges there. They don't hit it, but they cause an awful lot of confusion because on this bank have now come all of the camp followers, the medics, the sutlers, and everybody else that follows along with an army. As soon as those shells start to fly, everybody starts to run. And they start running for the bridge because that's the only way back across. And as they're running, Duchesne's Maryland Brigade, the last 5th Corps unit on this bank, starts to cross as well. And one of the Union artillerymen sitting up on the hill said it was the most ludicrous thing he'd ever seen. Two masses of men struggling in the middle of the stream, and the Marylanders were throwing off the camp followers. They finally fight their way across and get into action on the south bank. And of course, this is Warren, 5th Corps. A nice eavesdrop. I wonder if they even knew he was up there. And this is Cadmus Marcellus Wilcox, commanding that Confederate division. Starts out here at Knoll Station, lines up along the Virginia Central, attacks over into the woods, attacks those power lines. And as you can see, this is a line that was formed. And here comes Wilcox popping into it. These Union forces under Cutler are just moving into position. And in some cases they're carrying frying pans on their bayonets, they're carrying fence rails for campfires and such, and they don't expect to be put in combat. Until they run into this fellow, Edward Thomas, who was riding his horse and following us up on a fox chase. They come popping out of the woods. This is Hardin. He was wounded there by one of those fragments of Confederate shell, manning a brigade. And Thomas's men pop out into this area that's wooded now, and they're facing against the Iron Brigade, Robinson's brigade. And something very interesting happens there. It's firing a few rounds at each other, and each side breaks and runs back in the opposite direction. So you have a case on the battlefield where both sides are running in different directions, not against each other. And this speaks to the fact that every time I talk about an operation at North Anna or in Cold Harbor or anything else, these men are exhausted. And they've lost a lot of their impetus they would have had on that May 5th and 6th and through the Spotsylvania campaigns. And this is just an example of that. These fellows are tired. So you see the running back, the bravest of them take position along with 3 Napoleon batteries here in this open field. And they succeed in halting Wilcox's assault. Of the field. Try and get out of that today. But Wilcox is halted, but the 5th Corps is not driven back either. So now you have penetration here at the Telegraph Road, and up here at Jericho Mill on the 23rd of May. Now remember all the things we said were at stake when I began this lecture. We must fight to hold this Hanover Junction here, the Doswell area. And what happens if he allows Grant to pass it? Another one of these flanking movements. He's going to lose his ability to maneuver. Become pinned against Richmond, Fredericksburg, towards bigger and better things at Cold Harbor. Okay, with that, we'll halt with the slides. Are there any questions before we proceed?
So Lee essentially fails in his mission to stop Grant.
Right.
And keep him from continuing south in spite of his...
Yeah. Let me pull this back together here and give you some conclusions. Give you some more of the Miller drawings. Okay, we have the North Anna here. We have the R.F.P. and Virginia Central. Doswell. Grant comes across on Telegraph Ridge, Jericho Mill. Lee does his inverted V. On the 24th, there is some action against here and here at Oxford, which we'll spend a couple hours with today. And then, again, as I said, he pulls away. So, what's the bottom line here? And why have I spent so many years studying this thing? Why is it so important, I think, in Civil War history? Well, we look at winners and losers, and looking at the terms of the campaign. Lee must fight. And he says it. He says as he lays in his tent, unable to make that attack. And he says it over and over again. We must strike them a blow. We must never let them pass us again. We must strike them a blow. And he's not talking about Gettysburg. He's not talking about Chancellorsville. He's talking about North Anna. Because as I've said, once he passes this area, he gets to about 1 day's march of Richmond. That's why it's so critical. Now, Grant recognizes this, as you'll see as you proceed on to Cold Harbor. He's now become squeezed in with the Pamunkey, Chickahominy, the James. Still wants to try and defeat Lee before he gets in those defenses. He's going to order Baldy Smith's 18th Corps to come up and support him with that. But essentially, once he passes North Anna, you start to see the end of the war there. Now, why doesn't Lee make the attack? That's the begging question. Why doesn't Lee make the attack? He lays in his cot there on the 24th. He's well enough to about noon on the 24th when he rides out to Anderson's Tavern, but he is confined to his tent that afternoon. And he's sick. Why doesn't he delegate it? Look at his commanders. Anderson is brand new. He's sort of shepherding him through the campaign. Buell had a nervous and physical breakdown. A.P. Hill has just failed out there at Jericho Mill and just returned from his ailment. What about Jeb Stuart, who had taken over after Jackson Hill went down to Chancellorsville?
Yeah, didn't it?
Stuart's gone. What about somebody like Breckinridge, who'd come down, commanded a corps out in the west?
No general.
Didn't know the Army well enough. Lee was not going to trust him with anything like that. Now, probably the best solution would have been somebody like Jubal Early, who's going to give command of the Second Corps anyway, just a few weeks, less than 2 weeks. But he's not going to go jump in the chain of command of the Army. Do that to you. So, there you have the North Anna campaign in a short time. Yes.
Are we going to learn then how these two elements of Grant's forces get back together again?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about, well, there are a lot of interesting things here. One of which is, what does Lee say after the Bloody Angle fight on May 12th? And as they're leaving Spotsylvania, what does he learn from that fiasco? He says, let us have no more salients. Okay, what is this?
Yeah. But actually, he won the skirmishes at the head of the sword.
Well, what happened on the 24th, and I was going to say this a little bit for this afternoon, is Grant decided that there really was only minimal resistance here. Here at the tip of the salient at Ox Ford is the hardest Confederate resistance. He wants Burnside to cross here and connect these two wings. And he gets very frustrated with Burnside over the 24th as to why Burnside can't cross the river. And there's some caustic messages that go back and forth. Finally, Grant gets it up and sends a flanking force to come up behind him and drive off those pesky rebels. And this is where your friend and mine, General James H. Ledlie, becomes involved in the battle. And here's another problem with the armies at this point. They're starting to get in people into command that really haven't had that kind of responsibility before. They're from different theaters, and Ledlie is one of them. He's probably the worst general on either side of the Civil War, which makes him one of the worst generals in American military history, which makes him one of the worst in world history. Because what he likes to go into battle with a few drinks of alcohol on board, much to the trouble of his troops. And he does it again and again and again. And this fellow, the beginning of the war starts off with the 19th New York infantry. They shortly had a mutiny. Sent about 25 guys down to dry Tortugas for the balance of the war. It turned into the 3rd Artillery, which goes to fight in eastern North Carolina, and they end up shelling their own men in their first engagement, and trouble ensues from there.
Is he the one that was involved in the crater?
Right. He eventually goes on to, again, bigger and better things in the crater, and that's when he finally does get removed. But that's the 3rd time that I know of that he goes to battle drunk. So we will actually walk this. We'll spend most of our time at the North Anna in this Oxford Battlefield Park. And we'll actually see how and why in great detail Ledlie brought his brigade to its doom.
Which other sites are we visiting?
We're going to see Doswell, Hanover Junction, Carmel Church, where the corps forked off to make their double-prong assault. We're going to see Jericho Mills, at least the battle site area, and some of the movement on the way south. Now over here on the 24th is probably the most neglected action that takes place there, even by people that enjoy the North Anna, and that's the Battle of Doswell House. And this is an area where reinforced Confederate sharpshooter battalions best Gibbon's division of the 2nd Corps. And these are the fellows that repulsed Pickett's charge. The reinforced skirmish line succeeded in knocking them back. And they run out of ammunition in this fight. What would have happened if had, 3/4 of the Confederate Army gone up against them here on the evening of the 24th? Did not bode well for them. In this action, 2 Medals of Honor were awarded to the 170th New York. Another one of those high regimental numbers. These troops are coming down to reinforce Grant. And one is to a Sergeant Major Keel, who has to go under fire to get more ammunition down for his regiment. And the other is to Lieutenant Colonel Michael Murphy, who supposedly held his men in combat for 2 hours just with their bayonets against these Confederates. But Keel said after the war, he said that Murphy, basically was drunk and tried to withdraw his men, had to be put under arrest to keep the regiment from leaving the action. So that's Medal of Honors are plus and minuses over here. This is the best indicator of what might have happened on the 24th of May, and had Lee been able to pull it off there. Now, what might have happened had he done it? Grant was not going to withdraw. It might have rocked him back for a week, 2 weeks, till he brought in more reinforcements, and they would have continued on. But it would have had probably hard political implications in that early summer of '64. Remember how close the election was anyway? The North Anna could have been a turning point. And there's even a book by Ron Richards called The Southern Yarn, in which he has Lee winning at North Anna, political settlement is forced, and the Confederacy becomes a nation. And the two rise side by side. So in a nutshell, there you have the North Anna campaign. You'll see a lot more of it today. I don't want to pull all the cards out of my sleeve yet, but I just want you to appreciate how important it is, how critical it is in the 1864 Overland Campaign. The Wilderness and Spotsylvania are going to lead up to this action, and after this, Grant is going to have another shot at Lee, at Totopotomoy and Cold Harbor, which you'll hear about shortly.